and I say, hey, I learned about this idea. I was having this thought. Let's take a little team and go explore that. So instead of being like, oh, we're going to go follow a new direction, it's like, hey, I wonder what could happen. And you give people the permission and the ownership of exploring that piece, and you respect what they come back with. That's curiosity.
Welcome to the Kingdoms podcast, where growth mindset meets leadership and business insights. Get insights from top entrepreneurs, professionals, and thought leaders. Visit kingdomspodcast.com. Fuel your mind. Your next breakthrough starts here. Looking for expert legal support you can trust? At Grayfield Solicitors, we simplify complex legal issues for both businesses and private clients across Essex and beyond. From pensions and insolvency law to construction, conveyancing, and commercial litigation, our experienced team is here to help. With clear, practical advice and a commitment to results, we put your peace of mind first, every step of the way. We're proud sponsors of the Kingdoms podcast, championing voices that enlighten the world on growth mindset, leadership, and business insights for entrepreneurs. Visit grayfieldsolicitors.com today to book your free consultation.
We are live, ladies and gentlemen. You once again welcome to the Kingdoms podcast. And today I've got with me a very, very, very special guest fighting out of British Columbia. Welcome, Stephanie, the founder's founder. Hey, how are you, Stephanie?
It was quite an introduction. Thank you very much. I am doing well.
You're welcome. Well, that's the Bruce Buffer introduction, in MMA, UFC, and that's why I was asking you if you know anything about UFC, but I guess you can tell your big boy about it, that you got a Bruce Buffer introduction today.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll be very impressed. He's not impressed with much of anything these days, so.
Wow. I hope he does. You are a strategist, founder, innovator, mentor, and much more. Can you share a defining moment from your journey that shaped your perspective on entrepreneurship and innovation? And those are two things that are important to yourself and myself.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a point in time that all sort of entrepreneurs go through where they finally realize they have I wouldn't even say it's permission, but the capability to follow any path, right? And I can remember with that moment that I made the transition from I have to do what other people are doing because that makes sense to I've got this crazy idea and I'm just gonna that's what it's going to be. I felt it in my heart. I knew what it was going to be. And I was in Texas, of all places, not somewhere that I go a lot, but I was with a client in a retreat, and we were spending the day just kind of, putting all our stuff on the wall and looking at our own businesses. And I was looking at all of this stuff that I've done, all these things that I've tried, all these skills I've created, and all these projects I've worked on. And I was like, I don't feel like I'm building anything, right? I'm just kind of pinballing from one thing to another. And, it's all good. And I've gained a lot of experience, but I wanted to feel like there was something that was mine and that I had a real purpose that I was working towards. And that's when this whole sort of direction evolved for me around exits and strategy and building growth strategy from an exit perspective. And assets inside our business, and why are we spending all our time chasing income when we could be building something that's going to create value for us in the long term that's much bigger than the income that we're chasing today. And so this whole path sort of evolved, and it felt so aligned and so completely right for me. And then the conversations that I started having with people in my community, it just all resonated. And that was the moment that I realized that not only is this the direction I want to focus on, but it's also totally fine for me to be able to just say, this is not a conversation people are having right now. It's not a typical path. And that's also okay. Like, I can create that myself. And that was really empowering. And it felt very, very aligned for me. And I think it takes, some people take a very long time, and lots of people take a very long time to get to that point where they're like, this is it for me. And I love seeing those transitions with entrepreneurs.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack here. I did an episode, I think probably a few months ago. I'm not very, very sure. I think probably about 3 months ago, with a guy from your neck of the woods. And I think the title of that episode is Built for Exit.
Mm.
So basically, we were talking about building businesses for the purpose of exit strategies. And when you're doing that, the way you run the business is different from the way you run business, on a regular basis, because you are very, very concerned about valuation of that business, because the valuation of a business is what makes it attractive for exits. So I'd like for you to touch on valuation when it comes to building businesses for exit.
I think that it's not quite as cut and dried as that. And I think that's what I had sort of come to this conclusion around, that yes, there are lots of people who focus on exit strategy. And then that becomes the laser focus, that we just want to build the business for valuation, right? And I think that there's a lot of value, and this is what I will do with my clients, is we'll start from a valuation perspective and say, what would the business get you right now? Like, just right now, you wanted to sell it, what would it get you? But the most important part of that conversation is the risk adjustments, right? So when you go through risk adjustments inside evaluation, that's where you start to see all the opportunities. That's where you start to see where you can take this business to ultimately reach a valuation that's attractive, and that is something that you want to put in front of a buyer. But I'll say the piece that gets missing there with, a lot of these sort of A focused guys is that when you're solely when you shift your focus in your business to just think about valuation, you're still going to be building a business. You might be building a business that you don't really like. And there's a problem with that, because you're not going to put your effort in, you become quite burned out and quite unhappy. And my goal is to have business owners building business that they are super in love with, and that our strategies are derived from what we can create in terms of valuation in the future. So both those things have to be true. And so we have that combination. Like, I might come up with a bunch of strategies based on your valuation that are going to increase your valuation, but you might never want to do one of those strategies because it's so out of alignment for you. And it's not something that you could ever envision doing inside your business. And so the creative part of this, and the creative strategic part of this, is to be able to marry those two things. How can I put a business owner in their most powerful position, doing their most powerful work, and creating a growth strategy that's going to get them to a place where they have a much more valuable business? So those two things, I just would say there's a caveat to the whole build just for an exit. I think that it's very hard as a business owner to go day to day putting your time and effort into a business that is not aligned with what you actually want to build.
Absolutely. And if I were to summarize what you're talking about achieving a balance, or an optimal mix of passion and profit.
Passion
Passion and
and
profit.
value,
Profit.
right? Yeah.
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 So if you optimize passion and profit, definitely the value would typically go up. So the obsession should not be on the valuation, but the obsession should be on, using the passion to drive profit. And yeah, if you do the right way, the valuation will actually get into a good place, especially with guidance from financial experts like Stephanie Hayes. Speaking of profits, there's something I always love to say, that revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. And if you wish, you can say cash is reality. And profit says that you're winning in business, but cash flows determines how long you stay in business. And I know that's something you would agree with me. So when you talk about innovation beyond just profits, which is key to your philosophy, highlighting relevance, stewardship, safety, and trust. Can you please elaborate on why these often overlooked aspects of innovation are critical for sustainable business growth?
So innovation, this was my post grad work, was in innovation management. So I had this sort of near and dear to my heart. But so a lot of people think like innovation is sexy, right? It's sexy for profit businesses. And then I work with a lot of not like public sector organizations that still want
Not for
to,
profit.
not necessarily not for profit, but public sector organizations, right? So they're not, they're still bringing in money, but they're doing it for the purposes of something different, right? And so they're funding the organization. So it becomes this sort of sexy thing. And I see a lot of organizations sort of follow a cookie cutter approach to innovation inside of an organization. And people just want to focus on the making cool things. But when innovation is actually part of your strategy and is very important to your strategy and to your growth, then you need to manage it. And that sounds really like counterintuitive and it doesn't sound sexy and fun, but you've got to put a structure in place so that you are actually doing something with the results of your innovation and that you're being very conscious and very focused and intentional about why you're innovating. So I've got a public sector organization I'm working with to design their innovation strategy. And, the sort of the feet on the street, they're like, yay, innovation. And they try to follow all of the strategies of for-profit organization. But there's so much missing because they don't like their reason for innovating is to be good stewards of taxpayer money. So that they are prepared for regulatory and safety concerns, so that they are that they are doing the right thing for their constituents. Those are not the same motivators that a for-profit organization like a tech product company is investing in innovation, right? And so you have very different structures and very different processes for managing innovation inside both those organizations. So there's a really good book that was written many years ago about managing innovation and why you have to actually have a process for taking the result, like being very systematic about what you discover as part of your innovation process and making decisions about what you're going to do with it and having sort of a container for innovation. It's not just about, yeah, blue sky, just go out and try all these things. Well, it's not very valuable to the business if that's what you're doing, right? So I do believe that there's a whole other side of innovation, which is about the management of it and about the optimization of what you're investing in, and also ethics and security and safety and all of that sort of thing that you have to consider, as particularly, based on the environment that you're in.
There's a lot to unpack here. In terms of the motivation, right? You clearly put it that sometimes you could do the right thing out of the wrong motivation, but that is not sustainable. When you do the right thing on out of the right motivation, that is when you're able to achieve sustainability. Is that correct?
Yes. And what you do with the results of your innovation process is super important, right? If you're just going out there and being like, everybody just submit ideas. Okay, what are you going to do with those ideas? And how do you process those? How do you prioritize those? How do you take those through a very rigorous process so that you are ensuring you're getting the most value out of every step of your innovation process? And I've seen organizations just stand up an innovation team and they're like, yeah, here's some money, just go and do whatever you want. But then they build something that's actually in conflict with the values of the organization, or in conflict with, they're just not sustainable for, the business. And so there's a huge like value in blue sky thinking, but then you also have to be able to integrate the results of that blue sky thinking into the existing organization. And the decision there is, do I change something? There's enough value in what we've discovered that I change something inside the organization, or this is an incremental innovation, so I have to figure out how to integrate it with what we've got already. Or sometimes there's pressure for timelines, right? I have to get this to market much more quickly. So that means I can't invent something totally new for the way that we're going to sustain and deliver this. And maybe there's an incremental rollout for whatever we've discovered. So there's a lot that goes into innovation. And I think a lot of people don't understand that.
There's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of moving variables, when it comes to innovation, and especially when it's related, rather, the speed with which, when I say technological advancement happens is very, very massive. So sometimes you're even on a project to achieve a particular outcome, and then there is already like an upgraded solution to that problem you're trying to solve. Innovation is quite a tricky one, and I think that's why it needs to be properly strategized, properly planned, and we need experts like yourself, to guide the process, and of course, speaking of guiding the process, you have actually successfully coached over 10,000 individuals into becoming thriving business owners through fully booked VA. What's the most common obstacle people face when transitioning from traditional jobs to entrepreneurship, and how can they overcome these challenges?
I would say there's sort of two things. There's the mindset of having been an employee and having someone tell you what to do.
Mindset. I love
Right.
that. The subtitle of the show is Growth Mindset,
Yeah.
leadership and business insights. So I'm happy you're mentioning, the mindset. You are validating the purpose of this show. Thank you, and God bless you.
90% of the coaching we do inside Fully Booked VA is mindset coaching, right?
Mhm.
So the tactical stuff is the easy part. It's
Exactly.
getting from that place of somebody is telling me what to do to getting to the place where I have to decide what I'm doing on my own. And that's very, very confronting for a lot of people. And there's this, the other side of that is confidence and having the confidence to trust yourself, to know that you are going to take some action and it may or may not result in what you're hoping it results in. But when we shift that mindset from a mindset of judgment, like everything has to be either good or bad, to a mindset of curiosity, where it's like, okay, this happened. It wasn't what I expected to happen or what I wanted to happen, but now I have better information and I'm like this much further ahead. So a lot of people just stall on taking any action because they're so afraid of that judgment of themselves from other people. And they also just don't have the confidence yet in themselves to know and to feel strongly about the actions that they do take. So we do a lot of coaching to get them into action. And we sort of say that there's three pillars of you being successful as starting out as a freelancer or a service-based business owner. And I think this sort of applies to everybody. But the first one is your commitment to your journey, right? Like I'm committed, I'm going to decide that this is what I'm going to do. Because if you keep one foot in and one foot out and you give yourself the option to waffle, like that's the kiss of death. The second one is stay in consistent action. So whatever that is, just keep yourself moving forward and trying things and doing things. And even if they're little baby steps, just taking some action. And the third one is to stay supported. And so that's why we've created the community that we have. And that's why people like there's so much isolation as a business owner that those are the moments when people just can give up, and when they see and they can validate that other people, it's normalized, right? Like other people are having the same challenges, having the same questions. Sometimes people show up to the coaching calls just to be there, right? Just to be in community with people who are doing the same thing as them, even though they don't have a question or a challenge or whatever. There's something so strong about community and something so strong about being validated that you're just like everyone else. Like everyone else is also, you know, going through the same thing, have the same questions, whatever it might be. Those three things, I think, are the most important things for people to remember when they're going through this journey.
Wow, thank you very much for, those golden nuggets. Last thing you talk about is actually resonating with what I have on my wall. It's not over when you lose, it's over when you quit.
Mhm.
And everyone who listens to this podcast regularly knows how I talk about consistency constantly. Consistency is a secret weapon. It's a highly, highly underestimated weapon. I like to tell people I weaponize consistency. If you keep, being consistent at anything in the world, you will make astronomical, progress after, a period of time. But people don't realize that just put in the work every day, no matter how little it is, and it will surprise you what you'll achieve in a year, in 2 years. But people tend to chase wholesale changes, and wholesale changes do not come around very often. So it is what it is. Thank you very much for the golden nuggets that you're sharing on the show today. While we talk about your work, you emphasize creating agile operating models and managing change effectively. In your experience, what's the secret to embedding agility and resilience into a company's culture?
Well, I come from the tech industry, and so agility and agile is it's a very different terminology in the technology world. But when we talk about agility, and to me, agility is part of resilience. This is very much about a growth mindset, and it's all about understanding and seeing your business as something very fluid, right? And when people, one of the things that these early stage business owners do is that they get told and sold a bill of goods that the biggest thing you have to have is a vision and a strategy and a goal. Yes, I agree. There's a lot of value in being able to, you know, articulate what you want. But what they do is they get really committed to their success is only defined by reaching a certain point. Like they're going to get to a place and then everything is going to be perfect. And that's just not what happens, right? Business is so fluid and it's, by the time you get to that place, you're already focused on something else. And so when we can get out of that mindset of like, I'm not successful unless I've reached a certain point, and understand that every day is a bit of a continuum. Yes, we want to be working towards something, and having that something defined for yourself makes it much more likely you're going to be successful in that regard. But being uncomfortable with the fluidity of our business, like that's the joy of business, is that every day can be totally different and every day we can make different decisions and pivot in another direction and build something new. I think that's where resistance and this rigidity comes from, is these people are not necessarily business experts, and they, by their own admission, and so they get really like they listen to this commentary and this narrative and they think I'm a failure if I shift from this like rigid goal, and they get stuck in that and they just like they freeze and they don't know which way to move and they don't know how to get out of this. So this recognition that we're in this very fluid, like business is very fluid, even in a big corporation, it's still fluid. And I work with these public sector organizations that are so structured and so, rigid in terms of their HR processes and their internal processes. And man, like it takes 8 times longer for anything to be achieved in that environment because there's no permission to be fluid. There's no structure. Like there's it's a bit of like a structure actually gives you freedom, and structure is very important inside your business, but we have to understand what we want structure around and what we need to be more fluid around. And so understanding that and being able to build that into the business and be able to give everyone permission to sort of move around these things is super important. So I'm fortunate to have that experience in so many big public sector organizations, because you can see exactly where this rigidity happens and how much money gets wasted because of that rigidity.
I like the way you talk about structure because structure is very important to me. Looking at my background with the big four accounting firms, I was with PwC, KPMG, and a very large part of our success is actually attributed to the structures that are in place. Structures help you to be flexible. Structures help you to be scalable. But when people have their own organizations, they fail to implement and institute structures. It just feels like you trying to achieve a goal without strategy.
hmm
It's
I,
it's not possible.
I think it's the difference between structure and culture, right? So especially in like a firm like PwC, yeah, it's super important that, in a financial world, that there is structure and that we work within those structures. But PwC also has to have a culture of agility that allows us to question structure, that allows us to challenge structure, that allows us to
Uh-huh.
innovate on that structure
Uh-huh.
so that you can turn in a dime. Otherwise, you end up with a big, rigid organization that's stuck 1985, right? Where we don't know. And what ends up happening then is that you can't attract, like it's a cycle, right? You can't attract innovative thinkers. You can't attract people who are going to continue to push your edges. And then you end up a dead, right? Like just a dead head and piece of wood floating in the ocean, right?
Yeah, you cannot teach an old dog new tricks, but the old dog needs to, would I say, have a young mind. I think being old or being young is a function of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And speaking of PwC, like something I very, very much appreciate about PwC is the professional framework there. There are five, would I say, areas when it comes to the professional framework for assessing individuals. And I always tell my colleagues that they gave us the cheat code to succeed, in life and business. The framework starts with whole leadership, right? You should be able to lead yourself and lead others. Work on those technical competence, a highly, highly skilled at your area of core competence, right? Global acumen, be able to work with cross-functional teams, business acumen, understand the business environment, understand the business ecosystem, understand the important business metrics, and of course, building relationships. Very, very important. When you have these five things, unlock, I don't see how you're not going to be successful in business. I don't know if you would like to say something, about that framework, and what are your thoughts on the framework?
Yeah, I mean, this comes back to the conversation we had around innovation, right? So, what do you weave into the fabric of your organization so that you can give people a really smart and understandable way to see their path through the organization or see their path and what they're expected to do and from a performance perspective, et cetera, et cetera. But you've also got to give them the ability to challenge that. And to, as a small business owner, you have to think the same way. Give yourself a path, but give yourself like the opportunities to challenge it as well. And so that sort of, there's friction there for sure, and like the magic is in being able to balance that friction so that you can carry on as like in and let your machine run, but also start poking at the edges. And I find that this is a really important conversation with small business owners and their understanding their role in their organization, because they typically start as the doer, as the subject matter expert, as the person who's doing everything, and then they hold themselves to this responsibility, but they very rarely are innovating because they get so bogged down in the day to day. So when they start to shift their role inside their organization and challenge their role inside the organization, and then they can give themselves the space and the freedom to actually challenge their own structure and challenge their own, the machinations they've built inside their own business. So how you think about yourself in your business and the role you give yourself inside your business is actually really important.
I see you very much believe in a balance of structure and culture, and that actually helps with innovation and staying agile to remain relevant and resourceful for the future. You talk about the concept of value realization. So how can business consistently integrate value realization into their strategic decision making?
Well, this is about like the closing the loop, right? So I've invested in doing something. I've invested in, a new strategy, or I've invested in creating something inside my business. Even and we do this even in public sector organizations. You still have to go back and ask yourself and check in on the value that you've created for your business in with all those investments. Even if it's a day of my time I've invested in creating something inside my business, what value is it creating for me? When you dig into the product management mindset, and this is sort of front of mind for me right now because I'm building out a product management practice inside of a big organization. The product management mindset is all about value. So when I see organizations, and there's a parallel here for the small business, so stay with me. But when I see organizations move from a project mindset, we're just doing more and more stuff to contribute, but we're not looking at it from a more holistic perspective. Then I would say that's not a value focused mindset. That's just like do another thing, do another thing, do another thing. But we're never looking at it from the perspective of what value are we creating inside the business. So when we shift to a product mindset, we are shifting to looking at all of these interrelated parts of the projects we take on and looking at it from as a roll up and the value creation inside the business. So this is what we're starting to do with all of these folks inside of this organization, where we're saying, okay, so yes, great, you built these 5 business applications. What's the value you're getting from them? Well, the value is rolled up into a product. It's a piece of value we're creating inside the organization? What is that value? What's it contributing? When you start to ask those questions, it's really confronting to an organization that's been used to just doing stuff for a long time because in this particular moment they can justify it. But nobody's looking at the long term and saying, we've invested $20 million into this portfolio of projects. What are we getting for that? In a for-profit organization, that's a really important question because it affects, profitability, and it affects, we're always trying to maximize what we get from our investments. In a public sector organization, it's still a really important conversation because you are accountable to taxpayers, you're accountable to stakeholders, and being able to be accountable is super important, and to be safe and to be, compliant. So that shift in mindset is also still relevant even in a small business where you ask yourself on an ongoing basis, what value did I create from this investment? What value did I create from, the time I put into something, or, going on this business trip or whatever it might be.
So would you say from the private sector perspective, the evaluation is more on the quantitative side, while from the public sector perspective, the evaluation is more from the qualitative perspective?
Necessarily, like we do all of the economics, like the economic conversations, and I think in the public sector they're just not used to doing that. But it's no different than in a private sector organization where there's a number attached to the value you create around anything, right? Your number you just happen to have a sales number and a revenue number. Public sector organizations are still bringing in money, they're still bringing in funds, it's just for a different purpose, right? So that those funds still have to be managed, they still have to do something. So if we are not, funding our organization, we're not creating value inside the organization, because the more we fund the organization, the better we can serve their constituents, right? So there's still a value realization, an economic conversation to be had, even in a public sector organization. And this is a new way of thinking for a lot of public sector organizations, right? And frankly, I think it's one that, taxpayers should be demanding, right? They should be
Absolutely.
asking for, because when you're inside these organizations, you can really see how much we're wasting.
Inefficiency. Let's put it in a nice way. How much
But it's
inefficiency exists in the public sector?
but it's not coming from a bad place. Like, it's not coming from, just lazy people or whatever. It's coming from a lack of agility and a lack of flexibility inside these organizations, and too much commitment to rigidity, and too much commitment to these structures that have kept them
New
safe for a
process.
long time. Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a huge conversation to be had about it. It's not black and white. But I think introducing the concept of value and economic impacts of capabilities inside of a public sector organization is really interesting, because it's not a way that they've built their organizations in the past, but it still is relevant.
Absolutely relevant. You talk about understanding the economics of business capabilities. So are you able to give a practical example of how small businesses can apply these insights to accelerate their growth?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked. We are just starting up a new startup, which is based on a body of knowledge and then a piece of IP that we've created. My partner and I both come from an organizational design perspective, and we see a lot of how a misunderstanding or mismanagement of the human side of a business can totally impact value inside of a small business, right? So especially these high growth companies that are going through their like 50 to 500 people growth, right? So I think when we look at the human side of a business, this isn't motherhood and apple pie. This isn't HR practices. This is like what actually happens, and what are the capabilities we've built inside of the organization that are actually affecting how profitable that we can be. For example, high growth companies, they have a lot of turnover. They have a lot of not even turnover, but velocity inside of their people. Like, their people will come on board and they'll start here and they'll very quickly go over here. And there's all this institutional knowledge that gets lost. And so you have a lot of waste in, like, onboarding new people and not knowing where to get the knowledge that they need, and this like the non-codified knowledge. There's this whole concept of natural networks inside of an organization that we don't think about.
The
That
grapevine.
Well, it's called organizational network analysis, right? And it's actually really real. And moving to organizing teams around those natural networks and capabilities, as opposed to organizing teams around function. New concept, right? So that concept of capabilities and how those capabilities affect the profitability of that organization is actually really real. And so we're trying to help these small high growth companies understand how focusing on those capabilities can actually make them a lot more agile and make them grow faster without all of these trip ups that they get into when they have high growth and with people, right?
So would you say that is more inclined towards a project management perspective in terms of the organizational structure, instead of being structured based on function, but structured based on teams and achieving specific goals?
Oh, I don't think it has anything to do with project management. I think this is, you know, a great example would be um, most organizations try to build their teams around I need a I need a salesperson, and I need like a project manager, and I need a I don't know, a software developer, and I need a whatever. But those people are still people,
Uh-huh.
and they they integrate and they interact in really different ways, and there might be a lot of friction there because you're not thinking about the people. So when we actually build teams around strengths and around capabilities, instead we would say I need a team who has a commander, who has a connector, who has a diplomat, who has a like this is how we structure our teams instead. That can be a lot more effective, especially in high growth, than trying to together these more functional teams. So that's the hypothesis right now that we're sort of playing with and building a body of knowledge around that.
Well, and how's that going currently?
It's in its infancy, right? But there are tools out there and there are methodologies out there that are already starting to dig into this. We're trying to build something that's in the intersection of all of those. So if you look at organizational network analysis, and that's the start. That's like observing and mapping natural networks inside of an organization, like who goes to who for knowledge all the time, and where do those it's almost like deer trails in a forest, right? Where's the path of least resistance? So that organizational network analysis is the start of that kind of inquiry, right? Like, let's not force people into a structure that isn't natural. Let's actually look at what people are naturally doing already in terms of their internal natural networks, and let's start to um, build around those and see how much that affects and improves it could be productivity you're trying to improve, it could be retention, it could be knowledge management, it could be lots of different reasons that you might look at that, but those hypotheses are enabled by understanding all of this kind of stuff, right? So this is in its infancy, but it's an example of how we have to look at capabilities differently and understand that how those capabilities have a direct correlation to the profitability and the health of the organization.
Speaking of the health of the organization, when it comes to small businesses, curiosity plays a role for founders, right? So, what role do you think curiosity plays in terms of helping founders become successful entrepreneurs? And how can leaders foster a culture of curiosity and a growth mindset within their organizations?
Well, it comes back to what we talked about earlier, which is that dichotomy between curiosity and judgment, right? So when we create a real judgment focused culture, like things have to be good or bad, or we won or we lost, that's where people start to try and fit into those really sort of Boolean, and then you get false positivity, right? You get people always trying to be rewarded for something that was good and having a lot of fear around something that's bad. And so they don't take chances and they don't take risks and that creativity doesn't get flourished, right? This book that if anybody's really interested in reading more about this, there's a book called Wellsprings of Knowledge, and it's from, it's older, but it was, really interesting to think about how we build these very human sides of curiosity and creativity and innovation. So a leader who leads with judgment, everything has to be good or bad, is quelling curiosity, right? And so if you ask yourself that question, how am I leading with curiosity and encouraging curiosity? We still need the structure, we still need the goals, we still need to know. Everybody feels much more comfortable when they know where they're going and their
Exactly.
expectations, but you leave the edges open and you can demonstrate how your own curiosity can help us. So it's the difference between I have an instinct that maybe, we can follow this, we can try this path for product development, and like there's a new opportunity in the market. The difference is a leader who shows up and says, we have to do this thing. We're driven by competitive, forces. And like I worked in the .com days and this was rampant, right? Oh my gosh, we have to, like, every day you were shifting, and that gets really chaotic and hard for the team. And instead of I show up and I say, hey, I learned about this idea, I was having this thought, let's take a little team and go explore that. So instead of being like, oh, we're going to go follow a new direction, it's like, hey, I wonder what could happen. And you give people the permission and the ownership of exploring that piece, and you respect what they come back with. That's curiosity. Sending everybody off on a wild duck chase is not curiosity. So a lot of like founders will get into that space of thinking that they have to be the ones that are driving innovation and always creative and always, the next big tech bro, right? In reality, the respect that you have for your people to come back and say, we went and we investigated this thought or this idea, and here's what we came back with, right? That's curiosity.
Curiosity to say killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. So it's almost the end of the show. I've got 6 minutes left on the clock. What's your last piece of advice to young entrepreneurs looking to make it big and become the next big tech bro or the next, hot shot, in the business space?
My advice to you is don't try to be that, first of all, right? Because smart companies are the ones that grow in balance, right? They grow in an intelligent way and it's throttled, right? So when you're motivated to try and just get the highest growth possible, you will end up in a trap. So and that's what most people hear about in these big Silicon Valley stories and hyper growth. I think we're really moving away from that in the small business space and in the entrepreneurial space. And it's becoming quite divided. I think there are very smart and effective ways to approach growth, but always put it in balance. Like, we want to invest a certain amount of our investment in our business into what's working and be clear on what's working, while constantly challenging that and looking for new opportunities and being curious about those new opportunities. So always try and strike that balance, because that's what helps you with the long run, rather than trying to be the next superstar tech bro, because those stories are actually quite few and far between. It's much more common.
The
It's much
exact
more
words I had on
common
my mind,
for,
few and far
yeah,
between.
it's much more common for people to burn out and to fizzle out and to fail. So, like, just be smart, right?
Exactly.
Don't let ego drive your growth strategy.
Absolutely. 60% plus of businesses fail in the first 5 years. And that's a very, very wicked statistic. Oh, we've come to the end of the questions from me to you, but we have to take you through the Pacific Ring of Fire. That is the quick fire round. 5 questions, quick answers. 4 minutes left on the clock. They say it takes 4 minutes to save a life. So are you ready to rock and roll?
Let's do it.
Okay, tea or coffee?
Yes,
Which would you pick, tea or coffee? What would you pick?
probably
What's your
tea. I'm gonna go with tea because
uh
I'm becoming an old grandma lady.
it means that they need you in London. The tea
Great.
culture is strong here. To your favorite innovation of all time?
Online banking.
Whoa, that's that's a good one. That's a good pick. I love that. One book that every entrepreneur should read, must read, except from your book.
Right now, I would say X is easier than X, and I will caveat that with it's not because it's a piece of like outstanding literature, but once you get the concept and the idea, it makes you think really differently about the work that you're doing.
Fantastic. I think I should get that one, and maybe we have add that in the show notes, the link in the show notes. Early mornings or late nights?
Early mornings.
Early morning. Then we should run a business together. I'm a night owl. I'll do the night shift, you take the day shift, and everybody's happy. And of course, at number 5, one word to describe your entrepreneurial journey so far.
Wonder.
Wonder. My own word would be adventurous. Well, for me to you, it's a very, very big thank you. I always say these on the show. Gratitude is good attitude. And when a person shares their time with you, they share their life with you. So for me to you, Stephanie Hayes, it's love and respect to you. And of course, to our audience, please do the needful. Encourage me by supporting with sharing this with your network. And of course, I keep working tirelessly to bring in fantastic, great resourceful individuals like Stephanie, the founder's founder, Hayes. Tell your big boy that you have a new nickname, you have a new moniker. And of course, Stephanie, do you want to give a shout out to anyone before you leave? And please encourage our audience to do the needful.
The most important people to me have been my clients, right? They have taught me everything that I've needed to know, and they have, helped me evolve as who I am. And so I would just say thank you to all of them.
Wow, a very, very big thank you to the clients. There's no business without the clients.
That's right.
Well, and of course, there's no podcast without the audience. Guys, till I come your way soon, please stay out of trouble. Keep believing in yourselves. Impossible is nothing. And of course, always, always go for something. Always have a drive to succeed. And of course, if you've got any questions, please put them in the comment section. Don't ask me the questions. Please direct them to Stephanie. She's the pro. She's the pro, and I'm the Joe. Love and respect to you guys. See you soon.
Thank you.